This episode centers on a really small moment that quietly changed everything. The night Matt brought his son home, nothing was working, so he started singing Grateful Dead to him. And somewhere in that moment, he realized he was going to do this differently. He had lost his own father while he was in college, and with that loss came the weight of a relationship that never quite became what he had hoped it would be. As a new dad, that unresolved grief came rushing back, but instead of shutting it down, Matt leaned into it. Music became a bridge, a way to be present, a way to build the kind of bond he never had growing up. This conversation is about grief, fatherhood, and the moment you decide not to pass the distance along.
So I didn't know what to do. So I just started singing to him, which was very strange because I don't sing. And Stranger Still was my song choice. It wasn't Rockabye Baby or Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. It was a song by the Grateful Dead, Broke Down Palace.
You're listening to the Life Shift Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Gilhooly. This show is built around one simple idea, that sometimes a single moment can change how we see everything. Each week, I talk with someone about the moment that shifted their life and how they learned to live differently after it. These are not stories about having it all figured out. They are stories about what it looks like to keep going once the story changes. Thank you for being here. Here's today's story. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Life Shift Podcast. I am here with Matt. Hello, Matt.
Hi, Matt. Good to be here.
Thank you for wanting to be a part of the Life Shift Podcast.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be on.
Well, it's an honor to get to meet you in this way because we probably never would have bumped into each other in the world, you know, and it's an honor to be able to hear these stories. So before we get into your life shift moment, the before and after, maybe you can tell us who Matt is in 2026. Like, how do you show up in the world? How do you identify these days?
Yeah. So as of a week ago, I now show up as a published author, which is a new thing for me. I had been a lawyer, sort of an unhappy lawyer for decades. And as of last week, I published my memoir, Restrung Fatherhood in a Different Key, it's called.
Congratulations on that. I know that's
a
big feat.
Yeah. It was a couple of years in a windowless basement writing that thing, and it's out in the world. So yeah, that's, I guess, the main thing going on with me right now.
Yeah. And I'm assuming from the title that you are a father.
Yes. Well. Yes. Yeah. So the book, I mean, a 30 seconds pitch, it's about coming to grips with the death of my father. When I was in college, he died of lung cancer when he was 48. And the recognition that I didn't really know him, you know, in part because he was a largely absentee father, a workaholic lawyer type. And my struggle to not pass down that emotional distance, which I feel is almost somewhat endemic to the father-son relationship in some way, to not pass that down to my own son, and solving for that, hopefully, in part by sharing with him my passion for music, you know, so that he kind of knows what makes his dad tick, which is something I didn't know about my own dad.
Yeah, well, I love that. I'm sure it was a very cathartic and at times very hard experience to put that book together, but
yes, yep.
You felt good after you submitted it and it came out into the world. Were you a little afraid when it came out into the world?
Was and still am. But yeah, I think cathartic is a good word about finishing the book. Yeah,
there's something about putting your feelings to words, either out loud through song or just writing them down, where things become a little bit different. They have a different power to them.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Totally agree. Yeah.
So let's get into your story. Why don't we have you kind of paint the picture of your life leading up to this main pivotal moment that we're going to center today's conversation around, knowing full well that we have lots of life shift moments. You mentioned a couple just now and how your life is changed in different ways, but give us that before version of Matt.
Yeah. Well, as I alluded to, I was a lawyer, an unhappy lawyer for a long time. And in thinking about, you know, why I became a lawyer and why I stayed a lawyer and why I quit being a lawyer, which are some of the questions I've grappled with, you know, in this book. And I think one of the reasons why I became a lawyer was in part sort of inertia. You know, my dad, as I mentioned, was a lawyer. His dad, my grandfather, was a lawyer. My uncle, lawyer. Oldest cousin, lawyer. My brother. So it was like the family business. So that was part of it. Part of it was, I think, wanting to form some sort of connection with my dad because, that's sort of where he showed up was work, and he wasn't really around otherwise. So I think that was part of it. And part of it was, I think, an experience that I had at a record store when I was 12 years old. When I grew up in New York City and was very into music, like a lot of kids, right? But I spent all my free time and allowance money shopping for records in Greenwich Village. It's just sort of what we all did. And there was this one time, actually, I think 12 years old. It was before I started going to Greenwich Village. I was still on the Upper East Side, shopping for records before I was allowed to get on the subway to go to Greenwich Village. I was meeting my friends at a movie, and it was freezing out. So it was like in the middle of winter or something. And I was early. And so I ducked into the Crazy Eddie, it was called, which was like this weird electronics store had a great record section. I'm thumbing through the S section, and I get to the Sex Pistols album. And I'm looking at it, and I don't know that much about them. I know they're punk or whatever, and that they curse a lot and stuff. But I remember the clerk comes over to me, and he sees me looking at it, and he says, "That album will change your life." And I remember thinking, what does that mean? Like, is that a good thing? I don't know. I kind of like my life, but I'm curious about it. And so I'm rifling around in my pockets to see if I have enough money for the movie and the album, and I don't want to stand up my friend. So I tell him, I'll come back and get the album another time. And he looks at me and he says, "You'll never remember the name of that movie." And then off he goes, leaving me there. And, he was totally right. Like, I have no idea what the name of that movie was, but I did go back and buy that record and wore it out for decades. But it was kind of an important moment for me because I think it was my first inkling of the power of music to sort of shape identity and to shape lives. But it was also this moment that I kind of resisted in a way. I kind of didn't think, my passion for music wasn't as authentic as the clerk. I couldn't be that guy. Like I kind of knew from a young age, or at least had convinced myself that I was over on this side of the ledger, and like music wasn't what serious people did, and somewhere along the line,
it's not a real job.
Yeah, like it's good for a hobby or whatever. And so I think I had just sort of placed myself in this category.
Society probably did as well.
Yeah. I mean, I think there was just some expectations and so forth. And so I become a lawyer, and I don't really enjoy it, right? And then in the interim, my dad dies. So he died my senior year of college, and I still went immediately to law school.
And you said did you have a relationship with him, but it was just, you didn't see him very often, or was it a strained relationship, or?
Yeah, it was not strained. It was way better than a lot of, and probably most relationships, sons have with their dads. It's just, I always wanted to be with him. That's what I wanted as a kid, like just to be with him. And he was so unavailable, like physically, he just was never around. And then when he was around, he was like somewhere else, he was like thinking about work, doing work on the phone, whatever. And so I didn't feel like a real tight connection with him. I mean, I knew he loved me and all that. Like it wasn't like that, but I just feel like it could have been so much more connected.
And part of that element probably of resigning to the fact that you were going to be a lawyer was to have him see you. Like, I'm like you, like, and that brings that connection. I can understand that as well from a different angle. But when after my mom died, I realized that I had to be perfect, and mine was out of fear of abandonment. So it was a little different, but it was like, as long as I am great, my dad is going to be so happy with me and he won't leave. So it was like, I had to be seen by putting this unnecessary, at this point, pressure on myself to be perfect. And I can see how there's some parallels in how someone maybe in your case would want to do that so that your dad would see you in a more connected way of some sort. Yeah.
And I think the fact that we weren't that close before he died, I think it kind of supercharged my reaction after he died. Like I craved that sense of, closeness that much more. after he died. And I mean, I literally would wear his suits to work, you know.
Was it a sense of like you just didn't have you didn't have the time that you thought you might have? I don't want to put these feelings on you, but like I think we all assume that our parents are going to be around until we're old, right? We just think that, and now him dying eliminates your opportunity to create a closer relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, one of the things I guess question in the book is, you know, is there some point along the father-son continuum where you sort of you can have deeper conversations, you know? And did we just run out of time? I mean, I kind of feel like we would have gotten there at some point, but it was interesting to me because even after he was diagnosed, so I was a sophomore in college and he then lived for a year and a half. Even after he was diagnosed, we never talked about the fact that he might die. I mean, I think he thought he was doing me a solid by projecting, you know, invincibility or whatever, and didn't want to try, you know, didn't want to spoil my college experience or whatever. But so I think it was kind of from a place of love, but it's sort of odd, you know, even when it was obvious that he was dying, no talk about, you know, if the worst happens, you're going to be okay. I love you. I have the utmost confidence in you. Don't, you know, you got to live your life. I mean, God forbid that I should be in that situation. So my son right now is 20 and my dad died when I was 21. I can't imagine if I were in that situation now, not having a conversation with my son about it.
It's a different generation too. I would assume that your father assumed a lot of that mentality of men in the time period that he grew up. Did he talk to other people about it? Do you know?
I don't think so. I mean, obviously to my mom, but yeah, I don't think so. But you know, that's one of the things. Like, I couldn't even tell you who his best friend was. You know, I have no idea. And I think to your point, I think he sort of inherited that emotional stoicism from his dad. You know, I came across a memoir of sorts that his father, my grandfather, wrote when he was 87 years old. And it's like 43 single space pages. And there are 6 sentences about my dad. And it's like date of birth, where he went to school, who he married, just the facts. And it's like 40 pages about his career, you know, in excruciating detail. So I think, you know, that's what my dad knew. That's how he felt love, was to how he felt his father's love, I think, was to work himself to the bone.
Also in an industry that isn't really emotion driven, right? It's, as a lawyer, am I making a wrong assumption? But like living that day in and day out as a lot of your time must not allow for much reflection and those kind of things that come along with it.
Yeah. I mean, I think he particularly was in a very high pressure situation and dealing with who he perceived to be very important people. And so, yeah, I don't think it didn't seem like there was a lot of time for reflection or any downtime, really.
And so you know that he's sick. You know that he is, I mean, you can see that he's actually declining of some sort. How are you feeling on that side? Are you ignoring it? Are you feeling it deeply? Are you pushing it to the side because your dad is?
Yeah. I think I knew, well, I'll put it this way. So when he told my brother, I have an older brother, year and a half older, and he told us while we were on a vacation, like Christmas vacation, we were walking on a beach, and he tells us this thing. And my brother's reaction was, at least to me, was, you know, I'm not that worried about it, because my dad presented it as, they caught it early. I'm 46 years old. I have no symptoms. I'm going to be an outlier. And I think my brother, you know, that was his reaction, at least to me. My reaction is, my mom asked me how I felt, and I said, I feel like I've been hit in the stomach. You know, I really never bought into that, you know, that he was going to be an outlier. And yet I kind of played along with him. You know, I didn't, and part of it could be because, you know, I was 19, I was following his lead, you know, like if he's not going to bring it up, like, you know, I wanted to be strong for him. And for my mom too, I guess I took cues from him, like this is how I should show up for my mom. And I remember her coming to me once and she's like, she did say, I think we need to start preparing ourselves. And my reaction to that was, I think he's doing great. And as I say in the book, it was like she was falling and I couldn't hold out my arms to catch her. I just kept acting in this play that she wasn't watching anymore.
Yeah, because you probably, I apologize. I often do this, just put these assumptions in here, but it feels like if you grew up not having those deep conversations with your father, it would feel uncomfortable and scary to even approach it. So why put yourself in that vulnerable position? Because what if he responds unkindly and there goes that relationship you had always hoped for? So that's where my brain goes, is like it. Plus you were 19 or 20, what do we know at 19 and 20?
Yeah. I think so. It's
condition.
Yeah. I mean, there's one time my mom asked me to take him to his chemotherapy session, which was like 8 hours long, just sitting in this windowless space and for like 8 hours. And he brought his work papers and I brought a book and we just sat there and we didn't say anything, like this was normal to be sitting there watching like this.
You were
drip.
Anywhere else.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a challenge, but I mean, we can't change it. So we kind of like move forward with it. But you said when your father died, it triggered you to try to hold that relationship even closer. Is that kind of?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think I felt a need to sort of feel close to him, because as I say, even more so, I think than if we'd had a closer relationship beforehand, maybe I wouldn't have tried to cling to it so much afterwards. That's just a pet theory I have, but
were you there for the end?
No. So I was at school and I got a call the day of, I guess it was, and my mom just said, he's had a turn for the worse. You need to come up. We've got you a flight this afternoon and bring a dark suit. That's what she said. And so by the time I was in North Carolina, I flew up to New York. And by the time I got there, he had died. And, my mom, of course, I felt bad about that. She did her best to like try and make me feel better about it. He wasn't conscious. You couldn't have talked to him. There was really nothing for you to do. So, but still, it didn't feel great.
No. And it also leaves an even bigger hole, I would imagine, and probably another portion of why you tried to cling on to so much, because you don't get the goodbye. I think it's really hard. And you didn't even get the lead up to the goodbye. You had to do it on your own, if you did at all. Like for me, I feel, this is going to sound terrible, but like having experienced sudden loss as a child, losing my mom and then failing at grief for 20 plus years, what the gift it gave me was when my grandmother got sick, I did everything right for both of us. And we had the conversations and we left nothing on and so it was like a blessing that I screwed up so much of that decades before that I knew what to do. And it was like a totally different grief experience, but you didn't have any of that preparation and no one was modeling it for you either. So I can imagine how heavy that would be for you.
Yeah. I think that's, well put.
So take us a little past your father dying or what that changed about you, because I know that is a life shift moment in itself, but the one you want to talk about is a little bit farther down the line.
Yeah. So it really, I think becoming a father and just started me on this journey of reconnecting with that kid who was really passionate about music. It's interesting. It literally started immediately. Like the night we brought our son home, he was like a lot of newborns, very unhappy, screaming, couldn't get him to stop, tried everything, feeding him, swaddle, driving him in the car, nothing. And I remember too, like our dog was barking at him, because he was crying, and then the crying caused the dog to bark. It was like this downward spiral. And so I didn't know what to do. So I just started singing to him, which was very strange because I don't sing. And Stranger Still was my song choice. It wasn't Rockabye Baby or Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. It was a song by the Grateful Dead, Broke Down
Not
Palace.
The first one you would think of. Well, the first one you thought of, apparently, but not the traditional.
Yeah. And as I say in the book, I gave no thought to it. It came out of me like a breath. And it turns out it's a great lullaby. There's images of flowing rivers and the peace that comes with being home. And he actually fell asleep. And so it's funny. I thought, well, I'm going to stick with that. I'll do this for a few weeks, a few months. I ended up singing to him every night for 14 years, basically, until he stayed up later than me. And so I calculate that I sang Broke Down Palace like 2 to 3 times a week for 14 years. I worked other songs into the repertoire. And so I think I sang it more than Jerry Garcia ever did. But looking back at that moment, I think it was I think a desire to share my passion for music with him. But I think more than that, it was a way to kind of stake a claim to this part of myself that had kind of lain dormant as I tried to fill this hole left by my father's death. And I think I started to realize that hole, it's not ever getting filled. It just needs to be recognized, acknowledged, and transcended somehow. And the way to do that is not by suppressing your passions.
Or your feelings.
Yeah. Yeah. So that night kind of started me on this path to embracing that part of myself. And, like a couple of weeks later, my wife asked me to burn some CDs for her late night feeding session. So this was after the end of vinyl, which thankfully is coming back, but it was sort of the first end of vinyl and before streaming. And so I was literally burning discs in the attic. And she said, a disc or two, I burned 15 of them. It's like 20 hours of music.
From your Napster?
I didn't use it. Hey, I'm a lawyer. I didn't use Napster.
That's true. Fair. I didn't either. None of us did.
Yeah. But, as I say in the book, I kind of just poured over the decisions over what songs to put on those discs. Like it was an NCAA pool with a $10 million, prize or something. And it was clearly more than just fulfilling this task that I'd been given. Something was breaking loose there.
Were you apprehensive at all about the breaking loose?
Not in that moment. It was sort of like seeing an old friend or something, like, oh, I remember you.
Plus
we used to have a lot of fun together.
Yeah. And you're safe at home too, right? Like, so you can fully embrace whatever you need to at home.
Yeah. It became very scary years later. And so, this shift, it wasn't, I think that moment, bringing him home and singing to him like that was a profound moment for me. And it led to this kind of years long evolution. And one of the key moments on that timeline was I started a music blog. This was when he was about nine years old. I was at a party. One of his friends' parents were throwing a party, and the kids are out back playing, and the adults are having margaritas. And the hostess comes up to me, just asks me, what I've been up to, and I mentioned that I had just visited my brother-in-law in San Antonio, that I'd seen a great band there called Heartless Bastards. She then made the mistake of asking me what they sounded like. And so I went on like this 10-minute exegesis on like all the different sounds. And, she wasn't a rock music fan. So I think, my references to Neil Young's Live Rust didn't land with her really. But so after this breathless discourse, she says, wow. And I said, yeah, they were awesome. She's like, no. You talk so passionately about music. You should start a music blog. And I was like, yeah, whatever. All of this comes back. I'm a lawyer. I'm a serious person. Serious people don't write music blogs. There's also the imposter syndrome. I have friends who know way more about music than me. Like, well, who am I to to do this. So I kind of dismissed it. But then over the next few weeks, I just kept coming back to it. And then I, one afternoon, had the house to myself, and I just blasted Heartless Bastards all through the house, got out my laptop and wrote a blog post. And it was like the most fun I'd had in, in ages. So I'm like, let's do it. So, I started this music blog, and it was terrifying. I remember I sent an email to like pretty much everyone I knew, but there were some people I didn't send it to who I was sort of, because they were kind of work adjacent, and I didn't want to like be identified as a music blogger in professional circles. So there was a lot of that, but it ended up being, it's led to where I am now. It was started as a way to nudge classic rock fans out of the 1970s and by introducing them to new music, but it quickly expanded into narrative essays around the confluence of music and parenting. And I wrote a little bit about my dad, and some of those essays, got published. I got one in the New York Times, the Washington Post. So there was like some momentum building to it. And, this book that I just wrote is direct, can trace its lineage directly to this experience of starting the music blog. And
I think of you when you're writing these things and how much that must have opened for you. And like, was it a gradual thing where you would dip your toe into because you mentioned like the parenting angle and sharing about your father? Was it like doing a little at a time, or were you just like, I'm jumping into the deep end, and it was just always open that way? Because I can imagine how much that changes you as an individual when you start to share your feelings out loud.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it was gradual. I remember one of the pieces I wrote was just a very personal one about my dad and this one song. And it, I don't know, it was a pretty emotionally charged one. And I remember her saying like, why would you put that on the internet?
Who said that?
My wife.
Oh, okay.
She just found it very odd. And I couldn't really explain why. Well, partly I think at that time my blog following was like 20 people. So it's like, that takes some pressure off.
Yeah. Safety a little bit.
But I couldn't really articulate why I wanted to do it. It was something I felt really deeply. I guess I had some intuition that other people had had similar experiences, and that, it might be nice to find some kindred souls. But yeah, it was kind of gradual. I didn't like come out of the gate with that essay.
Yeah. But when you found more safety, it seems like when you find nothing blew up. No, the world didn't explode because I put a little bit of feeling out there. I understand it, from the perspective of a podcast too. It's just like, it's out there. And like we started out this conversation, like getting the words out are so cathartic. And I can imagine how this evolution of your blog could create really a new version of you that's like more confident sharing the parts that aren't the lawyer parts, like all the feelings and the things that maybe you didn't have as much permission to do. You probably had permission, but wasn't as natural, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, definitely.
So do you see any of that as like all that writing help you with the grieving the loss of your father, or recreating some kind of relationship, or finding a different connection? Like how did that affect that grief part of you that probably will always be there in some way?
Yeah. I think it was very helpful to the grieving process because it allowed me an outlet to write. I had kept a journal for I guess I started it right after he died, and intermittently would go back to it. And, I put like condolence notes in there and my eulogy. And then I would start writing myself little entries, and that went on for a few years. But I think the longer form stuff, I think, it definitely helped me understand my grief better, like where it was coming from. And again, recognizing that he was sort of absent before, which is partly why I think I was so in so much grief because now that opportunity is gone. We're never going to be close. So that was very helpful, just to kind of have this way to off gas it or something, you know.
Do you feel resolved in that at all?
I think,
not to push you into therapy or anything, but do you feel resolved by, because I mean, I think we find our own ways through grief sometimes, and this could be, that's why I was wondering if this was your solve.
Yeah. I think it's certainly writing the book. I feel like I came to understand him a lot better, and the forces that were acting on him and why he was the way that he was. And so that was helpful, I think, to kind of help me move past some of the feelings that I had. I mean, as you know, grief, it's not something you ever like totally get over, right? But the question is, how front and center is it? You know, how all consuming is it? Are you curled up in the fetal position on the couch all day? Or is it just sort of this gentle reminder periodically that, you know, you can deal with? And, you know, I think over the course of writing the book, it's become way more of the latter.
Yeah. Does that energy and grieving your father and understanding it more, the relationship that you had more, how does that affect your parenting?
Quite a bit, as you'd expect. I mean, I remember sort of committing, I don't know if I did this out loud to my son or just in my head, probably in my head, that, you know, I was going to be there for him for as long as he wanted me to be and for as long as I was around. And that's ultimately why I ended up quitting my job as a lawyer and to write this book, was because I felt like I was becoming my father in terms of just working all the time. There was this poignant moment my son was 13. It was his bar mitzvah weekend. And so we had all our family and friends in for the weekend. And I had to excuse myself for like 2 hours to work on a brief that was due on Monday. And I'm sitting there like, what am I doing? You know, and this case, it had been just beating me down for like a year. You know, I had stopped taking my son to school. I hadn't done it in months. And that was, I mean, that's gold that time. You know, we're like rocking out to E Street Radio. We're talking fantasy football. You know, that's the good stuff. And I used to cut out of work early and try and play golf with him. He's really into golf. Hadn't done that in a long time. And so, yeah, so I kind of made the decision, you know, I think I want to focus on this writing thing. That's kind of that's my happy place. And this, you know, this is starting to turn a little dark, the lawyer thing. And, you know, I fortunately I have a wife who's also a lawyer, a law professor. So, you know, able to support us while I indulged in this project.
That's a big decision though. I mean, the conversation takes me in two ways, you know, big decision, yes, to essentially lean into your passion so hard that you're letting go of what you thought you had to do for some reason because it was just your lineage or something that felt like since you were a kid, this is the path I have to go on. But also there's the part of it that when you said like you were not doing the things that you were doing before with your son, like how easy we can fall into these patterns that make us become like your father got, where it's like incremental until you're like, wait a second, where am I? Like, how did I get here? And so like, did any of that, like you approaching feeling like what your dad was, did any of that give you any like, I don't know, kind feelings towards the decisions that he made? Because maybe he just ended up in that cycle? Or am I projecting things?
I wish I could say yes to that.
Okay, fair. Yeah, I just wonder because like sometimes people just get so far down the road, like especially older generations, and then they can't admit it, right? Like they just keep going. Like,
yeah, I think for him, yeah, I think for him it was all about his dad. That's another thing I kind of felt by writing this book. I read a lot of memoirs by mostly like music idols of mine. And the need to have a relationship with your father as a son, I mean, it's just, I mean, this is nothing profound, right? Like, it's a very powerful thing, right? And it's like primal or something, right? This need for that closeness. And, that's how he felt it with his dad, who was still alive. I remember family dinners, they would talk about work. My grandfather was enthralled with all these deals. My dad was a mergers and acquisitions attorney. Like, CBS is taking over. So it's like, and my dad, I'm sure that made him feel great. And his dad was there. His dad buried him. He was there the whole time. So I think he kind of did what he needed to do to. And if we ended up taking a second seat or whatever, back seat, so be it.
Did your brother have a similar relationship with your father?
I think so. I mean, what's interesting to me about him, he became a lawyer also and practiced in the same sort of field as my dad. And he got, I think he still does, he's since moved out of the law, but he, for a long time, I think got a lot of comfort out of people, coming up to him and saying, "Hey, I worked with your dad. I knew your dad. Your dad was amazing." And he was constantly running into people who would say stuff like that to him. And I don't know, I didn't feed off of that in the same way. Like, if anything, it just made me feel even more distant from him in some way. Cause like, who are these people? Like, I don't have anything in common with them.
And why do they know him better than I did?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Right.
It happens. Yeah. It's really, it's challenging. And I think it's interesting to me. I didn't have a choice, but I was really close with my mom and my dad. We were close, but I don't think we would have had the relationship that we have now unless we were forced into it. Right. And we grew up and learned together on how to become what we are now. And so I'm really blessed that, but at the same time, I don't know that had I not lost my mom, I don't know what my relationship with my father would have been beyond, a loving relationship, but not like we are now. I mean, we went through some stuff together, so we had a different bond after, but before, I think I just remember going to, his house every Wednesday and every other weekend because my parents were divorced, and it was just kind of the custody thing. So I can imagine how having your father around, like at least living at home, but not feeling like you had that relationship is really challenging. But I can also see how it makes you a good dad now because you don't want that for your son.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and just picking up on what you just said, I've kind of had the same experience with my mom. Like, we are super close. And I'm not sure it would have evolved in that way. I kind of doubt it. But so, and I, it's hard to imagine her not being around, so I treasure it. And I've just come to really appreciate her efforts, that she made when my dad was alive. Like, I think she viewed her role to try and bring him into the fold of the family. And like, her strategy was to yell at him. Like, she was always yelling at him to get home for dinner or whatever, which didn't work. And I was always, as a kid, I always was like, I always confronted her. It's like, you got to stop yelling. You think he wants to work all night? You think he wants to cancel vacations on the way to the airport? Like, cut him some slack. Because she was the one screaming. I wanted it to stop. So I didn't blame my dad for anything, right? He was on the pedestal. And it's only much later that I realized what she was trying to do that for me. She was trying to get him home for me and for my brother. And she was screaming for me, basically. But I didn't, as a kid, see it that way,
Yeah. And she let you keep him on that pedestal, it sounds like, by doing that. And because she probably saw how important it was for you to feel that way. Yeah. Moms are something else. And I love that it developed that relationship for you. I can say my grandmother, she was the mom figure for me after my mom died. And wouldn't trade that for the world either, because you can develop that relationship even if they're not your biological mother. But I think that's really beautiful.
Yeah.
Since your son was born, what would you say is like the most different about you as a human being now versus before your son was born?
Wow. That's a good question. I think in some ways to open up more, maybe. And I just, I don't know. I'm not quite sure how to describe that, but I don't know. I just feel like more open as a person emotionally. And I mean, that relationship, I mean, it's so powerful. It's so emotional. It's that, I don't know, it changed me. I mean, obviously I love my wife. I love my brother, whatever, my parents. But I think it's just forced me to be more emotionally present too, I think, which is still a little bit of a struggle for me at times. It's not like, even though I recognize the issue and I'm trying to address it, I do still sometimes find myself not fully present emotionally. But
I think the awareness is so important, though. And if you have the awareness, then you can force yourself into those. You force yourself to start the blog, and it was uncomfortable. You shared. I think that the awareness is so important. Whereas previous versions of us maybe didn't have quite that awareness, that we weren't fully open. We thought we were, but we weren't in those ways. I think it's beautiful. I think you're just maybe allowing yourself to be more fully human, like all the parts.
mm-hmm.
Like for
Yeah.
me, it was very much till I cracked the door or cracked the grief bubble that I was stuck in. There were only certain emotions I was allowed to express, right? Like I couldn't, I could only be happy or mad, really, were like the only things. If I got sad, then it was seen as weakness. And this is all in my head, of course. But once I cracked that, I was like, you know what? I am a full human. Like I'm allowed to feel all these things and to react in the way that I need to, that feels the most connected. And it sounds like being a parent maybe pushes you more to just be fully you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Instead of buttoned
Yeah.
up like a lawyer.
Right. Right. Well, and also just wanting my son to know who I am.
Yeah.
Like I didn't know who my dad was,
Do you
really.
have hard conversations with your son?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. It's usually around music. Like we kind of did this thing where we came up with categories and what songs we'd play for the category or whatever. And one of them was, internal retreat. Like what song do you put on? And that started me talking about the album, the Soundgarden album that I put on in the deepest, darkest moments of grief when I was in law school. And just told him what a gift that album was and what it did for me and how I was locked in this cycle of self-loathing. I couldn't get out of it. And this album helped me feel less alone and create a space where, like you said, I could feel those feelings. I didn't have to say I'm okay when people asked me, how are you doing?
Right.
I could
The worst.
and it was like a drug. I mean, I would listen to this music and I could finish, my listening session on the headphones and like engage with people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love that. Does your son like music as much as you do?
He does.
Okay, good.
He does, as it turns out.
Because that first night at home.
Yeah. Yeah.
Does he like the Grateful Dead?
He
or
does.
Is he over that song now?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I should ask him what his gut reaction is when he hears that first note now. Yeah. Oh God. I'm glad it's not my dad singing it.
Well, I think that there's these beautiful memories that you're intentionally creating now, so that years from now, when we've moved on to different parts of whatever this earth brings us, he'll have those memories and he can then bring them to, if he has children. And, I think I love the intention behind it, because so many of us move through the world just we're just on that path, and like we said before, then somehow you get to the end of the street and you're like, how'd I get here? But it sounds like you're intentionally creating these bonds with your son and your family. I'm not going to just isolate him, but
Mm-hmm.
do you feel like you're intentionally doing that?
Yeah. Well, what comes to mind when you say that is, I mean, for his bar mitzvah, I got him a turntable, speakers, and some vinyl, some of which I knew he liked, some of which is stuff I liked. And I did that. He wasn't that into music at that time. And so I knew it wasn't something that he'd be that psyched about. But, and, you know, as I wrote in a note to him, which hopefully he still has, yeah, I did that intentionally so that he would have a piece of me if he ever wanted it, you know, at college or wherever, like in a way that I don't have that from my dad, you know? So, and, you know, at
Well,
13,
right. And it's the parallels with your music story. I mean, you were 12, but it's around that age of becoming a man in your culture. And like, so he has that version of you. Like, did you give him the Sex Pistols vinyl?
I gave him, I don't think so. I gave him the Rolling Stone. Like my original idea was every Rolling Stones album from Beggar's Banquet to Some Girls or something. And then, but I settled on, I think, what did I give him? I think I just gave him Sticky Fingers and Exile on Main Street because he wasn't that into the Stones. He was more into U2. I got him all the U2 records. And
I love the idea though, like but giving him the opportunity to connect with you in that way, if he chooses to, and if he wants to. I think that's important. Whereas, you know, maybe you felt the pressure to be a lawyer because your family, all your family members were lawyers. And now you're like, oh, if you choose to lean into this, here I am in this format. I think that's really beautiful. Did you do that on purpose like that? That's
yeah, I mean, I definitely want him to feel like, you know, that freedom to
yeah. Do you think
pursue.
if someone, a stranger, asked him, do you think that he would feel this connection that you feel from your side? What a loaded question.
I mean, I hope so. Like, I think so. Like he knows who my best friends are. He's friends with their kids. You know, we're more integrated in each other's lives. I'll put it that way.
I love it. Well, I love to hear that, and I'm sure it'll evolve in so many other ways as he gets older and you get older, and you know, life changes, and I think that's going to be a beautiful experience, especially because you're so dedicated to maintaining that and creating that, which I think all dads should do.
Yeah, yeah.
And they don't all. So I think it's a super admirable quality that unfortunately you had to go through what you went through. I mean, you didn't have to, but you went through that, and the silver lining, if we find one, can be this, that you're able to create this with your son and the people that you love. Keep opening up and keep sharing that stuff. Curious though, if you could go back, trying to think of who I'd want you to talk to. If you could go back to Matt, who was getting on that plane from North Carolina to New York, sitting in the seat, is there anything that you would want to whisper in his ear or tell him about this journey he was about to go on?
I think I would tell him to take seriously a note my Aunt Wendy wrote to me shortly after my dad died, which was, you've been through a traumatic experience. You're going to end up going to some dark places, feel those feelings, but know that you've had a traumatic experience and your perspective isn't right. And if you could see yourself how I see you, you know, you'd see this wonderful person, et cetera, et cetera. And I remember reading that and rolling my eyes because it sounded like psychobabble, you know?
But it's so true.
It's so true. And she was absolutely right. I did descend into those dark spaces. I wallowed in it.
And all of that was okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And it took me some time though to kind of allow myself to get out of that self-loathing, you know, and to know that, you know what, you're not a terrible person.
No,
you know,
no, and all of that is so valid. I mean, I love that she gave that to you, and you were a kid. Like, who's gonna buy into that? But it's kind of similar to people seem to think they'll come to me because I've experienced grief in multiple ways. Like, what should I do when they're experiencing something, a loss or something the first time? And I'm like, I can't tell you. This is your journey. But what I can tell you, and is very similar to what your aunt wrote to you, is that all of your feelings are valid. So at any point, allow yourself to feel however you're feeling, because you can. I remember like the first time I laughed after my mom died, and I was like so ashamed that I was happy about something, which immediately just doesn't do good things for you when you start to feel shame about emotions that are normal and allowed. So I love that she wrote that, and you have now to reflect on that and see how you can help other people through your stories and stuff. So I think that's really a really nice response. If people are listening to your story today, they're really interested in your book, or they just want to like reach out to you and tell you their story because something that you said resonated with them, like what's the best way to find you, get in your orbit, find your book? Like, tell us all the details.
Yeah. Well, mattfogelson.com it's like a one-stop shop for everything, the blog, the book, contact information, socials. I'm on all your favorites, Instagram, Facebook,
non-favorites
or non-favorites. Yeah. But yeah, I think mattfogelson.com is a good place to start.
So we'll put that link in the show notes. So anyone listening, I highly encourage you to go to the website. I also, if something that Matt said today hit you in a different way, or made you think about your own story, or made you feel validated in how you felt about a certain moment in your life, I encourage you to bug Matt and tell you about that and share your story, because I've learned there's so much power in telling our own story for the first time, sharing it with someone else, hearing someone else's story. There's the power of words, whether that's in music or a podcast or a book or whatever it may be. There's so much power in it. And sometimes people are afraid to share their story. So I encourage you to reach out to Matt and bug him and tell him, because I think it might be good for you too, Matt.
Yeah. No, it's not bugging me. Yeah, please
really
do.
It's really important. And I am so grateful that you wanted to share your story in this way and let me ask you crazy questions and see where this conversation went.
Yeah. Thank you, Matt. I enjoyed it. Thank you for having me on.
Of course. And I will say thank you to all the listeners. After 4+ years, going into year 5 now, I'm just so honored that people come and hear these wildly different stories, but hear the commonalities that we all have as humans, and the way we feel about certain moments, and the things we attach shame to, which logically we know we shouldn't, but we still do it. And it's just been such a pleasure to be in this space with everyone. So I want to say thank you, and I will be back next week with a brand new episode. Thanks again, Matt.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Life Shift Podcast. If you want to learn more, go to www.thelifeshiftpodcast.com. There you can check out all the different episodes. You can check out the blog, some of the reviews for the podcast, and the Life Shift Journal. Links are there, so you can purchase your own copy, whether in digital or print format. Thanks again.